The morning of her wedding felt like a scene from a dream. Sunlight poured gently through the lace curtains of Amelia Hartley's room, brushing against the satin of her gown and scattering across the floor like spilled gold. Everything was perfect, or at least, it looked that way. The air was heavy with perfume and nerves, the distant murmur of guests, and the faint rustle of silk as bridesmaids moved about. Amelia stared at herself in the mirror. Her heart thudded quietly in her chest. She was beautiful. Everyone said so. The way her brown hair fell in soft curls, the delicate makeup, the gown that shimmered faintly like moonlight. Yet, behind the painted calm, there was that familiar voice whispering from deep inside. Don't mess this up. Don't let him see you nervous. Don't give him a reason to joke about you again. Daniel had always been charming. The kind of man who drew attention just by walking into a room. He had a disarming smile, clever eyes, and the kind of confidence that made people orbit him. When they first met, he made her feel chosen, as if, out of everyone, he saw something special in her. But over time, his affection had started to sting. Maybe skip dessert tonight, babe, he'd once said, smirking at her reflection. You don't want to look too round in that dress. He'd laughed it off as teasing. So had she. Every time. Because love, she thought, was about understanding, forgiving, adjusting. The church bells began to toll, shaking her from the memory. It was time. Her father held her arm as the grand wooden doors opened. A wave of gasps filled the air, the kind that makes a bride blush. The aisles stretched long and gleaming ahead, flowers spilling from every corner. 300 guests, every one of them a witness to the fairy tale she had planned for years. And at the end stood Daniel. Tall, handsome, every inch the prince from her storybook dreams. When their eyes met, she smiled. For a moment, everything felt right again. The ceremony flowed like music. The vows, the laughter, the soft rustle of fabric as people leaned closer to listen. Then came the moment for Daniel's speech, just before they exchanged rings. He took the microphone, flashing that confident grin. My beautiful bride, he began, and the crowd melted in anticipation. I can't believe the day has come, when I finally get to call this incredible woman my wife. Lauder, claps. He winked at her. She's been amazing through all the planning, though I have to admit. He continued, chuckling. There were a few times I wondered if she was marrying me, or just planning a buffet for herself. The crowd laughed, lightly, awkwardly. Amelia froze. Daniel kept going, feeding off the uncomfortable chuckles. Seriously though, honey, you know I love you. Even if you've been eating for two lately. Guess I'll have to hit the gym harder to keep up with my beautiful little piglet. The words hit like a slap. The laughter stopped. You could hear the wind brushing against the stained glass windows. Amelia's heart pounded in her ears. Her mouth went dry, her fingers numb around the bouquet. She saw faces. Guests looking away. Some covering their mouths, others whispering. Her father's jaw tightened. Her bridesmaid tried to smile weakly, eyes wide with horror. Daniel's grin faltered when he saw her expression. But he shrugged, muttering into the microphone, "Oh, come on, babe, I'm joking." Something inside her broke. Slowly, deliberately, Amelia placed her bouquet on the altar. She reached up, unpinned her veil, and let it slide down her shoulders. The sound it made, a soft whisper against the marble floor, was louder than any scream could have been. The priest called her name. Confused, Daniel took a half step forward, his hand raised uncertainly. But Amelia didn't look back, not once. She walked past the pews, past the people who had come to see her. Happiest day. Past the whispers, past the silence that now filled the air like a storm about to break. Her heels clicked softly on the tiles, echoing through the church like a heartbeat. When she reached the heavy doors, she pushed them open. Sunlight exploded around her, bright and blinding. as if the world itself was holding its breath. Without a word, Amelia Hartley stepped out of the church, leaving behind the man who had mistaken cruelty for humor, and the crowd that had watched her humiliation. Outside, she drew a deep, trembling breath. The air was cool and sharp, and for the first time in years, she felt it fill her lungs completely. The church bells rang behind her, but she didn't turn back. Not for Daniel, not for anyone, because in that silence, in that single, defiant walk, something inside her shifted. It wasn't the end of her story. It was the beginning. The church doors had closed behind her, but their echo followed Amelia for days. She couldn't remember how she got home that night. The steps, the turns, the blur of headlights and tears. What she did remember was the silence. It was heavier than the insult itself. The kind of silence that sits beside you, whispering all the cruel things you're too tired to fight against. Her phone had started buzzing within the hour. Messages from bridesmaids, relatives, and even strangers. "Are you okay?" He didn't mean it. It was just a joke gone wrong. By the next morning, clips from the wedding had spread online. Someone had filmed Daniel's speech. Millions of strangers were laughing. At him, at her, at both of them. Hashtags trended with her name. Headlines called her the runaway bride. Amelia locked her phone in a drawer. For days, she didn't step outside. She couldn't bear to see pity in people's eyes, or worse, amusement. The house she'd once decorated with such love felt cold now, the walls echoing with the ghost of her plans. Her wedding dress, still hanging by the window, looked like a stranger's garment, a monument to everything she'd lost. Her mother came by with soup and concern, speaking softly as though Amelia might shatter if she raised her voice. "You did the right thing," she said gently. "You showed strength." But Amelia didn't feel strong. She felt hollow. At night, she replayed everything, Daniel's smirk, the awkward laughter, her own frozen face. And beneath the pain, another truth began to emerge. This wasn't the first time he had humiliated her. It was simply the first time everyone else saw it. She remembered the way he'd corrected her in front of friends, the way he'd teased her for ordering dessert, the way he'd told her she was lucky. He didn't mind her curves. She'd mistaken cruelty for humor, arrogance for charm, and control for love. That realization hurt more than the insult itself. On the 5th day, her best friend Claire showed up without knocking, arms full of coffee and a fierce kind of sympathy. "All right," she said, dropping her bag. "You've cried enough. Now we rebuild." Amelia wanted to laugh, but her throat tightened. "Rebuild what? My pride, my life." "Buth," Claire said simply. "And Daniel doesn't get to write your ending." They started small. Walks in the morning. Fresh air. No phones, no social media. Amelia began journaling again. Something she hadn't done since college. Her words were raw and jagged at first, then steadier, stronger. She poured everything out. The shame, the rage, the grief. Weeks passed. Her body began to move differently. Not lighter or thinner, just freer. She joined an art class. Something Daniel had always said was a waste of time. She painted emotions she couldn't speak aloud, deep reds, fractured blues, strokes of gold that felt like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Slowly, she began to see herself again. Not as the humiliated bride, not as a victim, but as a woman who had survived something cruel and come out still standing. One morning, she walked past a cafe window and saw her reflection, hair loose, eyes alive, and didn't look away. For the first time in months, she smiled at her own face. Meanwhile, Daniel's world was beginning to crumble. Amelia didn't seek updates, but people told her anyway. His company had distanced itself from him after the viral clip. Sponsors withdrew their support. Friends avoided him. His new relationship, rushed and loud, ended within weeks. The irony was almost poetic. The man who had tried to humiliate her now lived in the shadow of his own shame. But Amelia didn't gloat. That wasn't who she was anymore. Instead, she kept creating. She began designing small pieces of jewelry, handcrafted silver pendants with words like rise, bloom, and enough. She started selling them online under the name Aurora Designs. It was meant as a side project, but orders began pouring in. Women wrote to her, sharing their own stories of public humiliation, heartbreak, or lost confidence. Her pain had found a purpose. One evening, while sipping tea on her balcony, she watched the city lights flicker below and felt something she hadn't in months: peace. The world had moved on. But she didn't need to chase it anymore. She had her own rhythm now, her own silence, her own fire. Still, she knew this wasn't the end of the story. Somewhere inside her, a quiet determination had begun to grow. She didn't want revenge in the cruel sense. She wanted something deeper, something lasting. She wanted to reclaim her voice in front of the same world that had witnessed her fall. And as if fate were listening, an invitation arrived 2 weeks later. A charity gala hosted by one of Daniel's former business partners. Her fingers lingered over the gold embossed card. 300 guests. The same faces. The same city. Amelia smiled faintly. Perhaps it was time to return. Not to the past, but to the scene where it all ended. Because this time, she wouldn't walk out in silence. This time, she would own it. 8 months. That's how long it had been since the church, since the veil on the marble floor, since Amelia Hartley walked away from her own wedding. In 8 months, she had built a new life, piece by piece, scar by scar. Her small jewelry brand, Aurora Designs, had turned into something far greater than she'd dreamed. Each piece carried a story, hand engraved with words of healing and defiance. Her work wasn't just beautiful, it meant something. And somehow, women recognized that. Her inbox overflowed with letters from strangers, thanking her for giving them courage. Her face, once the center of public humiliation, had become a symbol of quiet resilience. The irony wasn't lost on her. The same world that had laughed when she left the church now praised her as the woman who rose. News outlets wrote stories about her transformation, her business, her strength. The attention was uncomfortable at first, but Amelia handled it differently this time, no longer chasing approval, no longer afraid of being seen. Claire often teased her about it. "You're practically famous, you know. I can't go online without seeing your face or one of those rise pendants." Amelia smiled, shaking her head. Fame was never the goal. Peace was. And yet, when the invitation came, peace trembled. The gold envelope lay on her desk, heavy with memory. Inside, the elegant card announced the Crosswell Foundation Charity Gala, an event sponsored by one of Daniel's former partners. It was to be held at the Regency Hotel ballroom, a place she knew too well. The list of attendees read like a flashback of her old life: business elites, family friends, and yes, Daniel Cross himself. For a long moment, Amelia simply stared at it. Her reflection in the polished desk looked calm, but her heart thrummed with something sharper than fear. Something close to destiny. Claire noticed the card later that afternoon. "You're not actually thinking of going, are you?" Amelia looked up. "Why not?" "Because that's his crowd," Claire said. "His territory." A faint smile curved Amelia's lips. Exactly. The night of the gala arrived like the opening scene of a different kind of story. Amelia stood before the mirror once again. Not in a wedding gown this time, but in a deep emerald silk dress that shimmered when she moved. Her hair was loose, her makeup understated. She didn't look like the same woman who once trembled under stained glass. When she entered the ballroom, conversation paused for just a heartbeat. Heads turned. Familiar faces blinking in disbelief. There she was, the woman who had walked out on her own wedding. But she wasn't broken anymore. She was radiant. Amelia Hartley, someone whispered, all laced with guilt. The host, an older gentleman named Mr. Crosswell, greeted her warmly. Miss Hartley, what a pleasure to finally meet the mind behind Aurora Designs. Your story has inspired so many. Or she thanked him graciously, smiling as cameras flashed in the background. For once, the attention didn't sting. It felt earned. And then she saw him. Daniel. He stood near the bar, a glass of whiskey in hand, his posture stiff when he spotted her. Time hadn't been kind to him. Not outwardly, but in the way his confidence had curdled into bitterness. The tabloids had feasted on his downfall, sponsors gone. His company's reputation tarnished. His fiancée having left him after a scandalous argument caught on video. Their eyes met across the room. For a split second, the world fell silent again, just as it had that day in the church. He hesitated, then began to walk toward her. Amelia, he said softly, stopping a few steps away. You look incredible. Thank you, she replied, her tone polite but cool. I've wanted to talk to you, he continued, to explain. I never meant to hurt you that day. It was a stupid joke. Her heart didn't race this time. She didn't feel the old ache or fury. She only saw a man who had lost himself to arrogance and was now standing in the ruins of his own making. I know what it's like to make mistakes, she said calmly. But humiliation isn't a joke, Daniel. Not when it's public. Not when it cuts deep enough to change someone's life. He swallowed hard. I've paid for it, believe me. Amelia nodded. We both did, but the difference is, I healed, though for a moment, neither spoke. Around them, music swelled, laughter filled the air, and the world kept moving. Then the host approached, microphone in hand. Ladies and gentlemen, before we begin tonight's auction, we're honored to have Miss Amelia Hartley share a few words about her work and the cause she's supporting. Daniel froze. Amelia smiled faintly, accepting the microphone. Her fingers didn't tremble this time. She stood tall beneath the chandeliers, facing the same kind of crowd that once watched her walk away. 8 months ago, she began, her voice steady. I thought my story ended in silence. I was wrong. That silence became the beginning of something stronger. My foundation tonight, the Aurora Initiative, is dedicated to women who have been publicly shamed, belittled, or broken by words meant to wound. Because words can destroy, but they can also rebuild. The room fell utterly still. Daniel's eyes dropped. Amelia glanced at him once, just once. Not with anger, but with finality. Then she turned back to the crowd and smiled. This, she said softly, is what healing looks like. Applause rose like thunder. And for the second time, Amelia Hartley walked through a room full of stunned faces. But this time, she wasn't escaping. She was arriving. The applause lingered in the air long after Amelia stepped down from the stage. It wasn't just polite clapping. It was thunderous, reverent, a sound that carried awe rather than pity. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like a story people whispered about. She felt like someone whose voice mattered. Guests approached her one after another, executives, artists, even journalists, offering congratulations and gratitude. Amelia received them all with grace, her smile calm and measured. She wasn't there for attention. She was there to close a chapter. Across the room, Daniel stood motionless, surrounded by the same people who had once laughed at his jokes. None of them met his eyes now. Their smiles vanished when they looked his way. Reputation, Amelia thought, was a fragile thing. It could crumble faster than glass, and sometimes, without a single word of vengeance. Later that night, as the gala wound down, Amelia stepped out onto the terrace for a breath of cool air. The city shimmered below her, skyscrapers and traffic lights twinkling like distant stars. For the first time, she could look at the world without feeling small beneath it. She heard footsteps behind her. Amelia. Daniel's voice was softer now, stripped of charm and bravado. When she turned, he looked almost unrecognizable, tired, regret in every line of his face. "I wanted to say you were incredible up there," he began, "and I'm sorry. Not just for that day, but for everything before it. For every time I made you feel less than enough." Amelia studied him quietly. Once, those words might have undone her. Once, she would have clung to them, believing that love could still be salvaged from apology. But not now. "Thank you," she said simply. "But your apology isn't for me to carry. It's for you to live with." He winced slightly. "Do you ever think we could have fixed it? If I hadn't?" "No," she interrupted gently. "Because the man I loved would have never made that joke in the first place." Silence stretched between them, but it wasn't heavy this time. It was clean, final, a boundary drawn in light instead of pain. Daniel lowered his gaze. "You really moved on?" "I had to," she replied. "You taught me what it feels like to be humiliated in front of hundreds. But you also taught me something else. That I never needed anyone's approval to shine." He looked at her for a long moment, as if trying to memorize the woman she had become. Not the one who once stood trembling in lace, but the one standing tall in silk beneath the city stars. Then he nodded, turned, and walked away. Amelia didn't watch him go. She didn't need to. That part of her story had already ended. Weeks later, headlines from the gala spread across media outlets. Amelia Hartley's Empowerment Foundation raises $2.3 million on opening night. The Aurora Initiative had become a movement, mentoring programs, self-esteem workshops, and safe spaces for women rebuilding their lives after public or emotional humiliation. Sponsors lined up to collaborate. Even schools reached out. Amelia worked tirelessly, but it never felt like work. It felt like purpose. Every story she heard, every woman who walked through her doors trembling and left smiling, reminded her why she'd endured everything. At one of her foundation's workshops, a young woman named Leela approached her. "I saw your video," she said shyly. "The one from your wedding. I know what it's like to be laughed at for who you are. I almost gave up. But then I saw you walk out, and I thought, maybe I could too." Tears welled in Amelia's eyes, but she smiled through them. "You already have," she said softly. That night, as she locked up the foundation's office, Amelia paused by the window. The moon hung low, glowing gently against the skyline. She remembered how she'd once walked out of a church feeling broken, with laughter echoing behind her. Now, she walked into rooms filled with applause. And silence followed, not out of shock or pity, but out of respect. The same silence that had once suffocated her had become her armor. Her voice no longer needed to shout. Her presence spoke for her. Amelia understood something profound: that revenge wasn't always loud or cruel. Sometimes, it was the quiet dignity of living well, of standing tall where you were once made to kneel. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. The air felt lighter now. Tomorrow, there would be more meetings, more stories to heal, more women to lift. But tonight, she allowed herself to simply exist in the peace she had earned. As she turned off the lights and stepped outside, the city hummed softly around her. Somewhere in the distance, church bells began to ring, faint, familiar. This time Amelia didn't flinch. She smiled. Because the woman who once walked out of that church in tears was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, brighter, and infinitely free. And in the echo of those bells, there was no shame, no heartbreak, only silence. Beautiful, powerful silence.